This video will cover information on section 7.3 of the study guide. This is the section that I've had people express a desire to have me record some information about this. If you need information on 7.2, then please let me know and I'll make a video for that as well. So I'm just going to start with your study guide and the textbook that you have and go through the different questions that you have. So this is about urine production, and the first concept is renal clearance. First question says, describe how clearance is related to kidney function. So what clearance is determines how much the glomerular filtration rate is, how much reabsorption of a substance happens, and how much secretion will happen. So in other words, if we think about clearance, we're taking things out of the bloodstream. And so we want to see how much of a particular substance is removed from the bloodstream by the end of the tubule. So some substances are freely cleared, everything is removed. Some substances, a little bit will be cleared, but then a lot of material will be secreted. And then there are some substances that will be filtered, but will be 100% reabsorbed. And so they will have no clearance at all. So there's a formula for determining renal clearance, and that's this right here. So CX is the amount of plasma that's cleared per minute of a particular substance. UX is the concentration that we find in the urine after clearance has happened times the volume or the flow rate of urine production divided by the plasma concentration of that particular substance. So how much that came out, how much was cleared, times how fast it was cleared divided by how much did you start with in the beginning. So that's what that says down there. So we can use this to determine glomerular filtration rate if a substance is freely filtered, not produced by the kidney. There's nothing that's going to impair the filtration of that substance. So in other words, the material must be small and non-charged so it doesn't get stuck in the filtration membrane on that negatively charged filtration membrane. We must not reabsorb it at all, so there can't be any, it can't fit through the tubule membrane, the proximal convoluted tubule cells, or it doesn't have a channel to pass through, it is not actively reabsorbed, and then again, it's not secreted and it's not broken down or produced by the kidney. And so what we're trying to take a look at is how quickly it comes out based on how fast the flow rate is through the kidney. So there's a substance that we can use when we're testing kidney clearance when we want to look at GFR, and that substance is called inulin. So it's a carbohydrate that is not produced by the body, and we inject it, and we know the volume of inulin that we put in, and then we take a look at how much urine got produced in a minute or whatever length of time, and then we measure the concentration of the inulin at the end, and it should be 1. So in other words, 100% of the inulin should be cleared. So we can use that to calculate what GFR is, and then we can also look at another substance to compare how well that is cleared. So so when it says, how do doctors test kidney clearance, we measure what's in the bloodstream and how much is in the urine, and then what the flow rate is, and then plug that all into the renal clearance formula or equation, and then explain the only circumstances in which clearance value is equal to GFR. So I just went through that with inulin. We do have a substance that we produce called creatinine. Creatine, of course, is found in our muscles. It's the substance that holds on to phosphate, that supplies phosphate in anaerobic respiration. So when we want to do substrate level phosphorylation and we want to produce ATP in a hurry, just a little bit to get us over the hump of our demand if we're doing some very vigorous muscle contraction, then the creatine will donate its phosphate, and then the metabolized byproduct is creatinine, and we get rid of the creatinine. And in fact, we get rid of the creatinine so well that we have we have standards for identifying kidney function. Creatinine is one, and then blood urea nitrogen, or the BUN measurement. Some of you might have noticed that on a blood test before. So we determine kidney function based on the values of those two substances. Okay, so the next question said, what is creatine and was the average value of creatine clearance? It should be creatinine on there, but anyway, it doesn't make that much difference. But technically, it's creatinine and the average value of creatinine clearance. So it's the substance, like I said, within our muscles. Creatine or creatinine is secreted based on age and gender. So there's actually a formula that adjusts for female creatinine levels, but here we just gave you a range, so you didn't have to worry about learning that formula. So males typically, because they have more creatinine, will clear more creatinine from their bloodstream. So they'll have so the clearance rate for creatinine will be 97 to 137 milliliters per minute for a male, and then it's slightly less for a female, 88 to 128. So if we compare other substances to creatinine's clearance, then we have a good idea of whether that substance is being reabsorbed or if it's being secreted. If more is leaving than we expect. So values higher than these will indicate if the clearance value, like it says, was 150 above the clearance for creatinine, then we would deduce that that substance was coming from somewhere else and not just being filtered, and therefore it was being additionally secreted from our bloodstream and into the urine. However, if we have a GFR or clearance value much lower than the clearance for creatinine, then we know that that material is being reabsorbed. So like glucose, for example, 0 clearance, because we should if we filter the glucose, then we should totally reabsorb all of the glucose. So the next question says, how does kidney normally clear the following substances? Glucose doesn't clear, 100% reabsorption. The only time we should ever see glucose in our urine is if we are diabetic. So that's how we know, and regardless of what kind of diabetes we have, type 1, type 2, gestational, doesn't matter. We just know that because there is too much in our bloodstream, the transport maximum for the glucose carriers, transport carriers that are in the proximal convoluted tubule, are overwhelmed, and they can only handle a glucose load of our bloodstream, and therefore our filtrate of what our normal homeostatic range for glucose is, like 80 to 110 deciliters. 110 milligrams per deciliter. So if your blood glucose level is higher than that, then that extra amount above the 110 milligrams per deciliter is going to show up in your urine. Okay, inulin, 100% excretion. Filters completely. You should get a clearance of 1 if we go on a percentage wise. Now, the para-aminohippuric acid is a substance right here, non-harmful substance, also used to test kidney function. What we learn with comparing values to PAH is how much is being secreted. So a little bit of PAH is going to be filtered, but when it shows up in our urine, it's because it was secreted or removed from the blood into the urine through that single pass because of secretion. And so penicillin will be secreted similarly to that. And then there was a question about, let me see if I can find it. Something about how do doctors, no, I don't even know where it is. Okay, well, I don't know where it is. Anyway, now we go to this chart that was in your study guide, it's the same as this chart right here. And so what we're taking a look at is we're going to start at the beginning of filtration, and here we just filter. What comes in must go out, and so you'll get a filtration rate of, clearance of 1. And then if we look at glucose, then we're going to get it all reabsorbed here and then excreted if we are above that threshold of 10 millimoles per liter, or what I mentioned before. So 100% reabsorbed. This is 90% secreted. Okay, so if it's above threshold, then we're going to reabsorb it. Here is excreted, so these are opposite one another. But we're going to filter some and then secrete the rest. And so that's what this is looking at. So this is neither reabsorbed nor excreted. This is 100% reabsorbed. This is 100%, or at least 90% secreted. So that's what that's looking at there. Okay, so the next section is on urine concentration and dilution. So how does the kidney concentrate and dilute the urine? And this is a very somewhat complicated concept. So if we take a look at this, we can produce a kidney with urine that's 1/10 as dilute of the plasma. Plasma is about 300 milliosmoles, or it can produce a urine that is 4 times more concentrated than the plasma when we're dehydrated. And the amazing thing, we never ever pump water, so we're always doing osmosis. So we're either pulling water back from the tubule into the blood to make a concentrated urine, or we simply allow the water to stay in the tubule if we are diluting our urine. If we're dehydrated in this case, my students here call urine stupid water. So we have places where we have stupid water. We don't need to get rid of it, but we are. And so if we're really dehydrated, urine is one place where we can take that water from and put it back into our bloodstream. So that's why we make a concentrated urine. Or if we drink too much fluid, we do not want to have high blood pressure. We do not want to have too much hydrostatic pressure and pushing that out into our tissues and become bloated. And so we want to dilute our urine. We always take in more water than we need through drinking and eating, and so we have to get rid of that water. So what do we have? We've got the loop of Henle that's going to take place, or is going to be the structure that's going to help take care of that, either diluting our urine or concentrating our urine, depending on the situation. So since we can't pump water and we're adjusting the osmolarity on either side of the tubule to allow water to pass, if we want to increase the amount of water reabsorption that we can do, then we have these proteins called aquaporins, and here they are, little water channels. So these are going to be in the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct, and they're just hanging out there. And so they're in the cells, they're produced in the cells, and they're just sitting there in secretory vesicles waiting to be secreted. Typically they're not, and so they will not show up in the membranes of the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct, and so water will not be reabsorbed. But in the case of in the presence of ADH, then it will, ADH, antidiuretic hormone, or vasopressin, will allow those aquaporins to be released from the vesicles, and then they will embed themselves in the plasma membrane, and then the cells will become very permeable to water. And so, and again, water can only move from high water to low water by osmosis, and so you're just creating high water areas, low water areas to make the water go, and then you allow it to go through the sluice gate. Otherwise, you shut the sluice gate or you take it out completely, and then the water can't pass. Okay, probably went too in detail about that, but it is what it is. Okay, so here are the different parts of the nephron and what's going on in the places that stuff's going on. So here we have afferent arteriole, efferent arteriole. Here's the glomerulus, and so we're gonna filter out into the glomerular capsule enough filtrate that it's isoosmotic to the bloodstream. So our bloodstream has a osmolarity of about 300 milliosmoles, and so does the bloodstream. So we're at equilibrium, pressure just pushed out until enough fluid came out with the same concentration. Now, we are going to secrete urea. So we didn't filter it here, and so there's still some urea in the bloodstream that we want to get rid of. So the kidney has three functions: filtration, reabsorption, secretion. Filtration is going to go blood to tubule, reabsorption will go tubule to blood, and then secretion will go from blood back into the tubule if it didn't get filtered the way we needed it to be filtered. And urea is one of those products that we're going to actively secrete back into the kidney tubule. So that's what's going on there, is the movement of urea back into the tubule. And then, so that's secretion of urea, but here is the reabsorption of everything. So organic compounds, glucose, we're going to get 100, and amino acids, we're going to get 100% of glucose, amino acid, all of our nutrients, all of those things are all going to be reabsorbed through, that was probably in the first section, through secondary active transport with the absorption of sodium ions. And I may need to make a video about that before your next test, because that's a really important thing. About 67% water is going to get reabsorbed here through the proximal convoluted tubule. And then we are going to dip down toward the medulla and go into our loop of Henle. Now, if you notice what's happening to the osmolarity of the filtrate, it is increasing as we go down through the descending limb of the loop of Henle. This is the thin descending limb of the loop of Henle. So what's happening here is that water is leaving because we have a high osmolarity, a high osmotic gradient that is drawing the water out into the interstitium. So this is, notice permeability to water. The descending limb of the loop of Henle is very permeable to water. So the water's coming out, and as the water leaves, now you are concentrating the filtrate. And why would we want to do that? Well, we need to maintain this medullary osmotic gradient out here that is going to cause the water to come out. And this side, we want the water to come out, but then we need to be able to pump the sodium back out here into the interstitium to draw the water out over here, so that we can always pump the sodium out this way. So now what are we doing? If we're pumping out the sodium into the interstitial space, look at what happens to the osmolarity. So we have decreased the osmolarity about 3 times. So we were 300 over here, now we're 100 over here. Now this right here is optional. This is only in the presence of aldosterone and ADH. So I don't like that this is the only picture that you have, because this is not the normal situation. Normally we do not secrete high levels of ADH and aldosterone, and therefore this 100 is going to carry on all the way down here to the renal papilla, and then into the renal calyces. So I'm going to talk about this. Why do we do this here in just a minute? Okay, so what parts of the kidney reabsorb water? Proximal convoluted tubule, descending limb of loop of Henle, and then distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct only under hormonal influence. So only in the presence of ADH will they reabsorb water. What parts of the kidney are impermeable to water? Then the ascending limb, the ascending limb of the loop of Henle and the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct under normal conditions. Okay, what is the function and purpose of the counter current multiplier system in the kidney? Okay, so and that's right here. So let's go down here and let's look at the counter current multiplier. All right, so what we want to do is we want to multiply the amount of sodium that we have within the tubule. And how are we going to do that? Well, if we start over here at the descending limb of the loop of Henle, so this is still thick descending as we get into the thin descending limb of the loop of Henle. And so we know, look at what's happening to the concentration. So it's increasing, very concentrated, because remember the descending limb of the loop of Henle is permeable to water and impermeable to sodium. So becoming more, we're losing water, concentrated until we get down to the bottom of the loop of Henle, which has a concentration of about 1200 milliosmoles. Interesting fact, I don't know where you are in the world, but here in my part of the world, we have kangaroo rats. And they are, of course, desert-dwelling organisms, because I'm out here in the middle of the desert. And the kangaroo rat has the longest loop of Henle of any mammal, and their loop of Henle, their concentration of their urine down there at the bottom, will reach 6,000 milliosmoles. And in doing so, they will excrete a crystalline urine. Their urea and uric acid do not come out as water. And you have all seen what that looks like when you get pooped on by a bird, because birds also do that same kind of mechanism, and therefore that white that comes out in a bird poop is actually the urea and the uric acid, and they preserve the water. Now I'm gonna just show you this because my students love this. So we'll kick over to me. I'm just gonna show you in my little box right here. I guess I'm hoping that, let me see. Let's stop sharing. I look really bad today, you guys. So anyway, oh my gosh, I look horrible. Okay, so if we take a look at this white powdery stuff right here, it's not flour. It looks like, or chalk dust or something like that. This is actually my tortoise's urine. I have a sulcata tortoise, which is an African spurred tortoise, and she is obviously a desert animal, and she does not urinate. She, in her feces, because she has a cloaca, everything comes out together, and so her feces will be accompanied by this white powder. And yes, I went out in my backyard and I collected tortoise urine. So that's what that is, so that she can preserve her water in a desert environment. This is what she makes. So there's white stuff that will actually be in a powder form, as opposed to the pasty white stuff that we see in a bird. But this is what a desert rat, a kangaroo rat, will also secrete. It's just one of those adaptations that they have to make sure they can survive in a desert environment. So there that is. I just love my tortoise poop. And everybody's all, why do you have tortoise pee? And yeah, I have tortoise pee. Okay, so we'll go back over to this. I don't even know how long we've been doing this. So that's what happens, is that the filtrates can be very, very concentrated down here at the loop of Henle. So now we want to do counter current. We don't want to filter in this, or we don't want to multiply in the same current. We want to counter that. So now we're going to go up the other side, and why we need to have a loop of Henle. So we're down here at 1200 milliosmoles. And now when we get here, we're gonna do two things. First of all, we're gonna do passive transport. We're gonna have just regular diffusion right as we turn the bend, because out here is not quite as concentrated as the 1200, and so the sodium is just gonna come out. We're not gonna actively transport it just yet. So it's just gonna come out. We're gonna have some, well, I'll tell you that later. So sodium and chloride, so potassium, they're going to come out here on the ascending limb of the loop of Henle. And then when we get to the thick ascending limb up here, we're going to actively transport. And because we've already been kicking out sodium here, we don't have as much sodium that we can kick out in our medullary osmotic gradient. I hope there's a picture of that to show you what it's like outside in the medullary interstitium. outside of the loop of Henle, and why the sodium wants to go. And maybe I'll have to find you a picture of that. I'll look and see. Anyway, so the sodium comes out, and now what's going to happen? Well, this thick ascending limb of the loop of Henle is totally impermeable to water. So the water's going to stay. What water was left is going to stay in here. And now I'm going to pump out my solute. And then when I get to the top, you can see, oh, I went in at 300 milliosmoles. I came out at 100 milliosmoles. So this is 3 times more dilute than what went in. Now, we have to have the vasa recta. And it says, how is the vasa recta a countercurrent multiplier? It's not a countercurrent multiplier. It's a countercurrent exchanger. So I don't know if that's going to show up in your test or not, but it's an exchanger and not a multiplier. But I don't think it, okay, so that's the loop of Henle. Okay, it says the vasa recta has another countercurrent, but it doesn't refer to it as an exchanger, but it is an exchanger, and I'll show you why. So if we just ran a regular capillary bed through across the loop of Henle, it would take away all the sodium that's out here in the interstitium. And there would be no reason for this water to come out right here at all. No reason for osmosis to happen. So what has to happen is that we need to preserve the medullary osmotic gradient. I'm gonna, before I leave this, I will show you that medullary osmotic gradient so you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so what we do with the loop of Henle, I mean the vasa recta, is, so this is a capillary, and so we're going to come in on this side, and what we're going to do, because what's been coming out here, sodium, so what does the water want to do on this limb of the vasa recta? Well, water wants to come out, so water comes out, water comes out, water comes out, and at the same time some sodium comes back in. Not a lot, but some sodium will come back in here. And if we take a look at what is the concentration of the blood down here in the vasa recta, it's concentrated down here. Now we're going to go back the other way, and we're going to reabsorb water, this water that came out and this water that came out here, and we're going to put the sodium back. And as we do that, so we took water out, we took sodium in, we exchanged there, and then we came around the other side, and water came in and sodium came out. And what is the osmolarity that we get in the loop of, or in the vasa recta as it comes up out of the medulla and goes back? It's that same 300 milliosmoles. So I didn't change the blood concentration at all. And what did I do? I took nutrients and oxygen to the cells that are out here in the medullary, in the medulla of the kidney, and then carried wastes and CO2 away. So I carried waste away, I brought nutrients to it and carried waste away without disrupting the medullary osmotic gradient, this concentration gradient out here. You know what, I'm gonna go ahead and find a video, I mean a picture of that while we're still on this, because that should be in your textbook. I don't know why it's not. All right, so if we take a look at, oh here, this is a good one. Oh, that's not so good. Let's look at this. Oh, okay, this will work. This is big enough, hopefully, for you to be able to see that we're still recording. All right, so here's the cortex in the kidney, and here's the medulla. Up here in the cortex, the interstitial fluid or peritubular fluid will always be isotonic to what's in the tubule. So 300 milliosmoles, 300 milliosmoles. Now, as we are pumping the sodium out here along the thickened ascending limb of the loop of Henle and some urea in the presence of ADH, look at what happens to the concentration outside of the loop of Henle. So it goes from 300 then to 400 along this whole distance out here, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 down here when we get way down here to the bottom. And it's this concentration gradient right here that's drawing the water out. So as this becomes more concentrated, in order for the water to continue to move outside of the tubule, you must make the outside more concentrated than what it is inside of here. So that is the medullary osmotic gradient. So that's why the water comes out. And then how do we create this medullary osmotic gradient? Well, we pump the sodium and potassium and chloride out into the interstitium. And so this is our counter current multiplier. So we went down one side and we come up the other side, and we are permeable to water on this side and impermeable to water on the other side. So that's what that means. Okay, so if we go to the next question, water wants to follow sodium chloride ions. That's a thing I tell my students all the time, water always follows salt. So, okay, in the table on concentration gradients in the kidney, in some cases I don't know exactly where they're going with this, but you know what? Let me see if I can show you what that looks like. You know, we can talk about it. Maybe not. Well, I don't have that pulled up here. So I'm just going to talk about in general what's going on. So it says proximal convoluted tubule concentration gradient. Well, that there's a gradient from the tubule into the bloodstream. As far as what I could deduce, that they wanted you to answer on that, because there's no little table like that at all in here. So I don't know. And we'll just pause on this while I talk about the table. Then the direction sodium chloride and potassium are moving, they will move from the tubule to the blood. Which direction is water moving from the tubule to the blood? And then other important details are substances of reabsorbed or secreted. So anything we want to secrete, so hormones, THC in that one stuff, marijuana. Why we do drug testing is because we secrete those substances back into the bloodstream. So whatever we want to secrete, urea we saw is definitely secreted. So PAH would be secreted. Anything that we secrete. Well, penicillin will go back into the tubule at that point. Descending loop of Henle, the concentration gradient increases within the tubule. Sodium chloride are not moving anywhere. They're remaining within the tubule. Water, which direction is water moving? Water's moving out, and there's nothing else as far as I can tell about that. Bottom of the loop of Henle, there isn't a gradient. Well, I don't know, it's more concentrated outside of the tubule than it is inside of the tubule. Has a concentration of 1200 milliosmoles. Sodium chloride aren't moving. Water's not moving. Nobody's moving at the bottom of the loop of Henle. And then as we turn the corner and we go up the ascending limb, now the concentration is less in the tubule, so the gradient is higher from the medullary interstitium to the tubule. And then sodium chloride, though, are being pumped out because it's active transport. So first it flows out passively by diffusion, and then when it gets to the thick ascending limb, then it's actively pumped out through the sodium potassium pumps. Water is not moving at all. It's staying within the tubule. And then in the presence of ADH, oh no, that's in the collecting deck, never mind. Okay, descending vasa recta, the concentration within the vasa recta increases. Sodium chloride's not moving. Water is leaving the descending portion of the vasa recta. And the ascending, it's becoming more dilute. So concentration gradient is decreasing. Sodium chloride's moving out. Water's moving in. Intermedullary space, the concentration gradient is getting higher as you go down into the medulla. So sodium and chloride are concentrating within the medulla. The deeper you go and there's less water, I guess I wasn't sure what they wanted on that one. And then distal convoluted tubule, there's not a concentration gradient. You're just 100 milliosmoles, except in the presence of ADH. And then no water and no sodium chloride are moving out of the distal convoluted tubule. And then collecting duct without ADH, without ADH, nothing's going on. We just stay at that 100 milliosmoles. But in the presence of ADH, we put the aquaporins in, and then the concentration gradient increases. So your urine gets really yellow and specific gravity rises, and sodium chloride and urea will leave the collecting duct, and water will go with it. And so it'll become more concentrated. Okay. Then reabsorption of water, on average, what percentage of water is filtered by the glomerulus is reabsorbed in different parts of the nephron? Okay, so it's pretty standard. 67% of water is reabsorbed to the proximal convoluted tubule. Another 15% is absorbed from the descending limb of the loop of Henle. Nothing is absorbed from the ascending limb, and another 10 to 15% at the distal convoluted tubule, and then a little bit of material at the collecting duct, depending on whether stuff is, hormones are present or not.